Hey guys, welcome back to another patch preview. My name is Irene, and I'm going to quickly go over what changes we can expect to see next patch in patch 10.25. While we'll give you guys a sneak peek of what's to come, the detailed list will come out tomorrow. So make sure to keep an eye on our channel. Hit that sub button and it'll be even easier to keep track of. Also, if you're interested, go ahead and check out our documentary channel that we just started. The link will be in the description, and we cover esports as a whole there. Alright, let's start that patch preview. First up, let's run through all the items that are getting changed. To kick it off, let's talk about nerfs. The first three items worth mentioning are Sunfire Aegis, Frostfire Gauntlet, and Turbo Chem Tank. They all share the Inhalate passive, and it's likely that, once again, it's going to get nerfed. We want tanks to feel impactful, but maybe they've been a little too strong. Didn't see this one coming with all the other anti-tank items that were introduced, but of course, numbers are still numbers. If the damage isn't nerfed, we might instead see the stats on all these items take a hit, making them a little less gold efficient. Even after buffs to Kraken Slayer, tanks are still overperforming, and the class is taking a hit through itemization rather than direct champion balance. So Seeker's Arm Guard got a massive change at the beginning of this preseason, and now it's up for a nerf. The item was made cheaper and also more straightforward. It's only a 900 gold investment now, so it's much more affordable, and players don't have to delay their power spikes nearly as much to tech into it. We don't want to get too into it, but basically this item is beyond good for such a low price point, and it'll likely have its scaling reduced. While most players didn't expect the collector to be OP, it's actually getting nerfed. While you're investing quite a bit into a high-risk, high-reward playstyle, the collector actually provides a very powerful set of stats. Attack damage, lethality, and critical strike chance all on the same item make it an extremely viable one. While alone, the item is lackluster, but as part of a set of 3 or 4 items, it's obvious that all these stats are going to create a very powerful multiplicative effect. Ultimately, this item is supposed to be extremely powerful with its execute passive, or be very weak when you can't pick up those kills and snowball. While the item is still gold inefficient, the fact that it splashes into such powerful stats on the same purchase actually makes it a very strong supplement to many builds. We're not sure how this item will get nerfed, but I'd expect it to get a price increase. One thing that's been an issue has been lethality on ranged champions. For example, the biggest perpetrator is Jhin, as he gains immense amounts of AD and can utilize lethality to one-shot squishies with no problems at all. Riot has stated that they're planning on nerfing this, so we'll likely see a conversion introduced that reduces the effectiveness for ranged champions. Mages have started using Muramana, so it's also going to receive a nerf. Now that it applies damage on spell hits, it's created some unexpected new builds that Riot isn't happy about. It's likely that some of the mana conversion will be changed into bonus AD or something along those lines, so that the item remains an AD focused one rather than one that AP champions can splash physical damage into their build, and actually it's a ton of it. With nerfs covered, we can talk about item buffs next. Immortal Shield Bow has been introduced as the mythic item of choice for carries that need a defensive option. It provides damage as well as stats to help players survive. However, it doesn't feel like enough, and players are still struggling against assassins and divers. Unlike one of its competitors, Kraken Slayer, the item falls just short of being gold efficient. It's uncertain what to expect, but maybe it'll receive some base stat buffs, or even some extra power on its passive. Yone and Yasuo players have been building this item, and I'm sure they'll especially appreciate a buff to Shield Bow. Gale Force is also receiving a buff. Marksmen still feel a bit weak, and Gale Force is definitely one of the more rare items we see used. In the same fashion, this item also isn't gold efficient, and what we'd most expect is for it to receive some more bonus AD or some other stat boost. Of course, Kraken Slayer is also getting a buff. This makes it pretty clear that Riot wants to give the Marksman class as a whole some love, and while it did receive a buff to its AD this patch, that hasn't proven to be enough. Maybe it'll gain some more stats. It's pretty uncertain, as this is the one item that's already gold efficient, and it may instead receive a buff to its passive. One other thing that Riot could do, with all 3 of these being named as things that are getting buffed, there's potential that they just reduce the cost of the Marksman Mythics, making them all more gold efficient. The buffs don't end with mythic items though, and Rapid Fire Cannon is also set to receive a buff. It actually provides slightly less attack speed than its counterparts, and thus, it might need a small buff to keep up. Also, because Rapid Fire Cannon provides a flat damage buff rather than one that can scale like Runan's or Phantom Dancer that provides a ton of attack speed when stacked, it feels much weaker than the others in the late game. If it's not stat buffs, I'd expect to see some form of a ratio introduced or a damage buff to the passive. Now here's a buff that should affect almost every marksman. Infinity Edge, one of the most iconic items for any ADC, is getting buffed next patch. This item has become less of an essential purchase, and more of one that you can make to finish off a build. Its impact is rather weak early in the game, but becomes extremely effective later. To buff the class as a whole, I'm not surprised that Riot plans to buff this item, as it should be even more rewarding for players that manage to farm up enough gold to finish their other items. Then, slap on an Infinity Edge as the final touch. If you've gotten to the point where you can finish an Infinity Edge and it's your most effective purchase at that moment, you're probably already really strong, and you're going to be even stronger. With marksman items out of the way, let's talk about something else with Bandle Glass Mirror. A new component introduced this season, it builds into the powerful support mythics, Moonstone Renewer and Imperial Mandate. Sunfire Aegis is great for 1v1ing marksmen as a support, but let's not forget how much value these two other mythic items really provide. The issue, however, is that Bandle Glass Mirror is a very underwhelming purchase right now. Compared to other epic items such as Seeker's Armguard, it doesn't feel like you really get much for completing Bandle Glass Mirror, and a buff to it should make the build up into a support mythic much smoother. And surprisingly enough, Imperial Mandate is also getting a buff. Probably one of the strongest mythic items. It's likely that this item is only getting buffed because Riot wants to give supports as a whole more agency. That said, Moonstone Renewer, Shurelia's Battle Song, and Locket of the Iron Solari are all getting buffs as well. These buffs are more understandable. The cost of all these items are going to be lowered and the stats adjusted a bit. Moonstone Renewer is still pushed aside for its counterpart, Imperial Mandate, except by specific supports. Since Riot wants Season 11 itemization to be situational, all items need to be powerful enough to justify purchasing under the right circumstances. Shurelia's Battle Song and Locket of the Iron Solari are such rare purchases that some buffs could help incentivize players to give them a try. Riot is giving all supports some love, so if you felt like you had too little agency as a support, don't worry, because the heroes at Riot have got your back. Another support item receiving a buff is Zeke's Convergence. It provides a nice range of bonus stats, so it's more likely that its effect will receive a buff instead. More base damage wouldn't hurt, but it's also possible that the scaling will be increased instead. A bunch of support items aside, Luden's Tempest is also receiving a buff. It was just nerfed, but Riot has decided to give it back some power after taking it away. Rather than reverting the nerf, it's having its power shifted. It'll provide 10 more ability haste, but also provide 4 less magic penetration. Given that you'll be able to activate its passive more often with more ability haste, this will still be a buff for almost every champion that wants to build it. Everfrost is also getting the same treatment. It'll also have its ability haste increased by 10, meaning that mages who love to spam their spells will be able to do so with either purchase. With ability haste being weaker than cooldown reduction, it's nice that these items have gotten a buff so that champions can gain access to reduced wait times much faster. That's it for all the item changes, so let's talk about champion changes next. In spite of nerfs to items as well as direct ones, Kayle is still clearly too powerful. In both the mid and top lane, Kayle sports ridiculous win rates, as high as 55% still, and players in Western servers are suffering against her. Expect some harsher nerfs next patch, as the nerf to her passive was a very small one this time around. In the jungle, Riot is tackling Kayn first. This guy is an OP pick or ban, and it's about time Riot decided to balance him. Gore Drinker Rost is a very popular pick right now, and he's nearly unkillable with all that vamp he has. Even in high elo, Kayn is an absolute menace. Now in the mid lane, we've got quite a few nerfs, but the one that's most needed is for Fizz. He's been on the top of our last few tier lists, and we've been letting you guys know how oppressive he is. Slippery, incredibly bursty, and difficult to play against. It's no surprise that he was going to squirm onto the top with all these new item options. A random champion that came out very powerful was Morgana mid. While rather unpopular, Morgana currently holds a 54% win rate in the mid lane in high elo. Liandry's Anguish is an extremely powerful purchase on her with all the burn damage, and I'm curious how they're going to nerf her without hurting her as a support. Annie has also been a powerful pick since last season, and Riot is finally going to nerf her this time around. We've had her listed as S tier for many months now, and while she's a very simple champion, she's equally as effective. Galio is in a similar boat as Annie. Not super popular, but extremely powerful, and for that same reason, he's getting nerfed next patch as well. Hextech Rocket Belt has made it even easier for Galio to access the backline and effectively roam. He's just getting some necessary tweaks for this preseason. The bottom lane has had two clear winners right now, and that's Samira and Jhin. These two are the strongest marksmen right now, and it's no surprise that they're both getting nerfed. Jhin is by far the most popular pick right now, and he even holds a 24% ban rate in high elo. While that doesn't compare to Samira's 74%, 24% is still extremely high, and you shouldn't write it off just because Samira's is absurd. Now here's the good news, or maybe bad if you hate Yone and Yasuo, but we've got buffs. Anivia is underperforming quite a bit. Without her precious Rod of Ages, this bird is absolutely lost. She needs some buffs to help her compete with all the other mid laners, especially the assassins. Pantheon top is also receiving a buff. This is more likely to incentivize more players to play him in solo lanes instead of as a support. While we saw some nerfs aimed at support Pantheon recently, we can expect even harsher changes very soon. He's got a ton of changes coming up, and if you want to know more, we actually have a video covering them. Talon has felt a bit weaker as a result of the changes to Tiamat this season. It's much harder to randomly splash it in, as you'd have to purchase one alongside Iron Spike Whip for a similar effect to last season. With his wave clear taking a hit, he's in need of some help, and it looks like he'll get a buff next patch. In the jungle, we've got Warwick getting a buff. As an excellent entry point for junglers, it's always sad to see Warwick when he's underperforming. He's doing very poorly this preseason, and he's getting some buffs to help him out. While Wukong has been doing fine in the top lane, his jungle win rates have plummeted. Expect to see some increased damage to jungle monsters included in his kit next patch. Rengar has also ended up a lot weaker as a result of all the item changes. This is likely also due to how Tiamat has been changed. A lot of Rengar players rushed one last season, and with it being a much weaker purchase on its own, there's no surprise that there would be some growing pains. He'll also get buffed next patch. The most surprising champion on this list is Lulu. In high elo at least, Lulu is the most popular enchanter. However, when looking at all games played, it's clear that Lulu isn't absurdly strong. She still holds a positive win rate, but Riot is going ahead and giving her a buff next patch as well. In contrast, Taliyah is a champion who has been dying, in-game and also dying, for a buff. Finally, I know a lot of you guys have been begging for them, and Riot has finally answered. Twitch has been underperforming significantly as well, and is receiving a buff. His low win rate might be partially due to players experimenting with AP Twitch and losing some games, but overall, lane bullies are still king of the bot lane right now. He's going to need some love to consistently perform well, and Riot is planning on buffing him next patch as well. Mordekaiser is next on the list, and unfortunately, Riftmaker was recently nerfed. Riftmaker was just broken, not Mordekaiser, and it's no surprise that he was going to need some compensation afterwards. Qiyana's win rate has fallen below 48% in high elo, and this is rather concerning for the balance team. While a lot of assassins have come out extremely strong, Qiyana has been struggling as a result of the nerf to Eclipse, which was absolutely busted on all AD assassins. She's going to get buffed as well. And even though I'm celebrating, Preseason has been one of the biggest tragedies for Karthus, as his win rates have fallen to around 44% in the jungle. Jungling is a whole new beast now without the old runic echoes, and the mid lane hasn't been treating him well either, so he'll be getting some buffs next patch. Same goes for Nidalee. The jungle is really different now, and she had to face a ton of balance changes with the old system. Most of those were nerfs, and it's finally time that Nidalee receives buffs because she needs to be balanced around the new systems in place. Fun doesn't always equate to good. Lee Sin is probably the most fun he's ever been with Prowler's Claw, but his win rates are proportionally suffering. His win rate in Platinum and higher has sunk below 43%, and no amount of a high skill ceiling can justify a win rate that low. A buff is coming, boys. Ivern is as unpopular as ever, but we all know he's a huge oddball in the jungle, and unfortunately, the preseason changes didn't treat him well. Yet another jungler on the buff list, and I'm sure Ivern players, all two of them, will be happy to see him receiving some assistance. It's a double buff for him though, because support items are also getting buffed next patch. It's rough playing Nasus in the top lane right now. He finally was seeing a good amount of success, but the preseason changes shook things up for him, and he'll be getting a buff next patch because of his poor performance as of late. Riot's most recent creation, Seraphine, is still being used as a support far too often. Once again, she's getting buffs as a mid laner, so maybe she'll actually be played there more than as a support next patch. Her supported playstyle has just made her more appealing as a duo laner rather than a solo laner. With enough changes, this could easily go 180. Finally, Yasuo and Yone have been underperforming significantly. Players finally figured out that Ginsu's Rage Blade was busted towards the end of patch 10.23. Then, it got nerfed this patch, and the struggle began once again. Alongside buffs to Immortal Shield Bow, some direct buffs should help them see a brighter future next patch. That'll cover our patch preview for patch 10.25. Thanks for watching.